All right, Larry seems to be having some connectivity problems, but we'll start. We have a number of guests joining us this evening, namely Hyde Jackson, who has been selected by the interview panel to do the architecture for the court and the police station. And we had hoped to have, oh, there's Bunny. And we have Bunny Brown, who's a principal with JBP, because I have trouble pronouncing the P, Bunny, I'm sorry.
Palcuic.
All righty, it's Jackson Brown and whatever Bunny said.
Yes, sir, Palcuic.
Palcuic. We have Rob Dodd, who's with us from Nabholz. And we've got Gail and Randall from Hyde. And then we also interviewed and selected CEI to do the civil engineering for all three. The mechanical engineering, plumbing, and structural will remain with the architects that have been selected. So the way it worked was we sent out a request for qualifications. We had 14 responses, and we ended up interviewing 8 of the candidates. And the selection was myself, Doug Tapp, the 2 chiefs, and Rob, who was representing Nabholz, and Mark Kleinert, who was going to join us, but I don't think he's here yet, who has the construction management for the 2 fire projects. So I've asked, and then, sorry, Daniel, I forgot to mention you as well. And then we're going to have Daniel Allen, who represents Raymond James. They are our municipal finance advisors. We're going to talk about the underwriter selection as well. So we'll do that after the architects and CEI. So we're grateful that all of you are able to join us this evening. I'm going to be asking each of the selected candidates to give a 5-minute elevator speech talking a little bit about the company, their experience, and how they're going to help us be successful. So without further ado, I'll start at the top, and the first I see is Randall and Gail from Hyde Jackson. So I yield the floor to you folks.
All right, thank you, sir. I have a little presentation, but I don't know that's necessary. So we'll just talk, and then if you have any questions, we're here for you. So Hyde Jackson's been in Northwest Arkansas for 47 years. And in that time, we've done most all of our work is in the public realm. So we know very much how to handle projects who are answering to constituents, I guess, in the public, and because there are always concerns about a fine line to walk between how much money you're spending to make sure that you have a civic building, and as well making sure that every penny that you spend makes sense to the people that live in your community. We have 27 people in our firm right now, and we've got, along with us, we are including in our team Brian Mead, who is from FGM Architects, and they're a more nationally recognized public safety architect. So we brought them to the table so that we can make sure that we're filling any holes that we might have missed. We want to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of all the decisions that we're making, that we don't want Chief Graves to walk into his building at the end of this and say, wow, I sure wish we would have done such and such. So we have brought him to the table as well. So, and Brian is travels the United States speaking at conventions, and he has helped write quite a few specs at the national level for police facilities specifically. So we feel like he is going to be an important aspect to the project, along with the fact that we are local. We feel like we know the construction environment very well. We will be teaming with Nabholz, and we work with them constantly and have a great relationship with them as well. And we also, we're very client oriented, so we're going to be watching out for you constantly. We did the study on this, and so we know quite a bit about the project, but we're also open-minded enough to make sure that that everything that Brian Mead brings to the table, we can make that all work for you. Was that?
That's great. Rob, you're going to be, well, not you, but Nabholz is going to be the construction management on this project. I know that you're very familiar with the folks at Hite Jackson. Any words of wisdom at all?
No, we're just looking forward to another project. We team up real well together, and there was some impressive interviews. They were impressive with their approach, and have a great team that they're bringing to the table, and we're excited to work with them and FGM and just another partnership, and we look forward to a great project. So we're very, very excited and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Council members, we have worked with Nabholz before. They were the construction managers on the street building back in 2015, 2016. We received the Hite Jackson contract today. Jason's going to be looking it over, and we'll have it out to you as part of your regular council packet. But in the meantime, does anybody have any questions for either Rob at Nabholz or Gail and Randall over at Hite Jackson? Ready? Yes, Steve?
Sorry, late question, but I'm just curious as to kind of that relationship between Hite Jackson and Nabholz. Is Hite Jackson, are they accountable to Nabholz? Do they answer? Does Nabholz kind of direct their participation in the project, or are they accountable back to the city of Bella Vista, or both?
I'm sorry, Mayor. Do you want to?
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was just we answer directly to the city of Bella Vista. Our contract will be with you. We'll be watching out for you.
Nabholz, along with Kleiner Construction, who we worked with when we built Fire Station number 4, will be scrutinizing the architect's plans to make sure Gail isn't going to try and slip in a gold colored, pure gold toilet to help keep our costs down.
Dang it, Rob, you're going to ruin my plans.
No, this is a great format, the CM at risk format, and working with the design team and the city of Bella Vista. It's what we like to describe as a three-legged stool, and it's a great partnership. All three entities working together with a common mission, and it's just going to work great together. So. Like Gail said, the contract with Hite Jackson will be directly with the city, as is ours, and all three of us will just work together as that three-legged stool to make sure you have a great project.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
When does, I apologize, probably stated somewhere, when does everything usually kick off? And I know we're kind of making associations right now, kind of greetings and stuff, but I mean, when does the work begin?
As soon as council approves the appointment of the architects, then the designing begins.
Okay.
Good question. Anything else? Okay, let's move on now to the fire projects. We have received the contracts from JPB, and they are items K and L in your packet. We have divided them up between the fire station, number 3, and the training facility. And Mark Kleinert, I can't see you, but I'm hoping that you're able to hear this. Mark is the equivalent of Nabholz on the other project. Mark's company is looking after the construction management part of it. And we have Bunny with us tonight. Bunny Brown is one of the principals. And Bunny, I yield the floor to you, sir.
All right, thank you. I'm Bunny Brown, president of Jackson Brown Palcuic. We've been in existence in its current format since 1983. We do a lot of different general construction, commercial type construction, but we have had an emphasis on municipalities and fire stations for the last 25 years. We've done projects all over the state and outside of the state, with numerous very successful projects in Northwest Arkansas, and several with the current team with Mark Kleinert. So we've, some of those have actually even won national awards, even though we don't pursue those awards. They have been recognized nationally. So we're proud of those aspects. But most importantly, they've proven to be very functional over the years. And a lot of our department work is also repeat work, where we've done multiple projects with different municipalities all over the state. And we're looking forward to working with you guys on this one.
Great. Mark, can you hear us?
He's having a problem connecting. We're trying to work with him.
Okay, we're having problems connecting with Mark. Are there any questions at all for Mr. Brown? Well, we're looking forward to working with you, Bunny. You certainly have a very, very long list of successes, and in talking with some of our neighboring cities where you have worked on multiple different stations and activities, they're certainly very impressed with your product and your knowledge, so we're looking forward to it. So thank you for coming out this evening.
Thank you, sir.
The next is the civil engineering, and we decided to go with one company, CEI. CEI is no stranger to the city. They did our, strategic plan in 2012, and then we worked with them, gosh, Jacob, it's got to be at least 4 years ago on the Reardon Road aspect.
Yep.
Where we were, thinking maybe we should do something between Dairy Queen and the bend in the road that goes up the hill, and should we reconfigure, et cetera, et cetera. And we decided not to do it after hearing some of the public input. So we've selected CEI. They're well known in this area. And Jacob, I'm going to yield the floor to you for your 5-minute elevator.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So CEI has been around for a long time. You guys all know, 50 plus years. We, like the mayor said, we've worked with the city a lot. We're familiar with the process, familiar with the people. I believe we all kind of get along pretty well. We've also worked with Bunny numerous times on other fire stations. We've worked with multiple architects in multiple states over multiple places, and we've done a lot of commercial work as well as a lot of fire stations and police stations. So we've also worked with Kleinert on those, and Nabholz as well. So, I think what we bring to the table is just the knowledge of kind of the area, and the knowledge of as well as fire stations and police stations. So we're just here to help you guys any way we can, and I guess we'll be the fourth leg to the stool for Nabholz.
And we'll have their contracts reviewed by Jason, and any changes necessary, and in your packet for the meeting 1 week from today. The final piece to the puzzle are the underwriters. And similarly, we worked closely with Daniel and did an RFQ. And the two that stood out will probably come as no surprise to you. Stevens, who has been around for a long time, and they're out of Little Rock, and Cruz and Associates, also out of Little Rock. We have our CDs invested through Cruz, so we're very familiar with them as well. They each have different strengths, and one of the interesting strengths that I'm sure Daniel is going to expound upon is that they have different clients that they go to at the time of selling the bond. Daniel, I'm just going to let you pick it up from there.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening. Like the mayor mentioned, we did get 2 responses, or I would say 2 quality responses. We got a third that really was not eligible, could not provide the service to the city. I would say I have good things to say about both firms. We work hand in hand with Stevens and Cruz at various times on different projects. Like the mayor said, they do have some different investors that they could each bring to the table. One of the things that, Stevens has done the vast majority of sales tax bond issues in the state, while at the same time, Cruz has done just as much in the space outside of sales taxes. A lot of water and sewer, a lot of various issues with universities. So we would recommend that the city do a two-handed account. Stevens would be the lead, with Cruz being the co-senior manager. They would each have responsibility for half of the transaction or the liability for half of it. What that allows us to do is that instead of picking one, we've now got the abilities of both firms. And I've talked to Bob about being the co-senior manager, and he has no issue with that. What it allows for us to have ideas and distribution capabilities from both firms. Today, there has not been a sales tax transaction in the state of Arkansas since the outbreak of the coronavirus. That's not saying that there won't be one, but we are kind of in a new day. And I had a conversation with our underwriting desk and my salesmen and traders, and they felt that the more parties you can have at the table to sell the bonds for the city, the better circumstances, the better situation the city would be in. It doesn't add any cost. They're each paid based on a percentage and the bonds that they sell. So that's how we would propose, given the market conditions and the unknowns in the coming months. I think the more players we can have at the table, the better.
Thank you. I will tell you, council members, that I did speak with Mayor Hines down in Rogers, and I spoke with Mayor Sprouse in Springdale. Both of them have used both firms, and both of them have done, I'll call it for lack of a better word, Daniel, co-underwriting, and have been very, very pleased with the results by having both these firms in their court. Is there any question at all, or questions for Daniel?
This is John Flynn. I had a question for Daniel. Today the Federal Reserve announced some aggressive bond buying. It was all 5 years or less, stated purpose to insert liquidity into the market. And I was wondering if that sort of thing, he sees that having any effect on our situation with our bond.
No, I don't know that it would directly have an impact, but the Federal Reserve has been very blunt that they don't intend to raise rates in the near future. It may be a couple of years before we see short-term rates rise. What that will do is, by them keeping the short end of the curve low, everything else is going to be indexed or benchmarked off of treasuries typically. So it's going to help hold the short end of the curve near these absolute levels. But the Fed's not going to step up and buy the city of Bella Vista's bonds. They're not actively buying in that capacity. They're buying big blocks, big, highly liquid deals. But it does help provide liquidity to the broad fixed income market. So in that instance, it would be beneficial.
So it sounds like in good shape with a low interest rate.
Yeah, I personally, so we are in the market, as the mayor mentioned, doing a joint account. We are actually selling bonds for the city of Hot Springs. We did one 2 weeks ago, and we're selling another 100 million tomorrow. And the roles are reversed. It's Stevens and Raymond James as the underwriters and Cruz as the FA. So all of these, our trading desks and our teams work together on a daily basis. So I think this helps, as opposed to, not that one firm or the other couldn't get it done, but if we're wanting to achieve the lowest possible rate, I think having the added underwriter at the table is beneficial.
Daniel, who's a typical buyer of bonds like ours? Are they institutional or even?
It's a combination. So last week in the Hot Springs deal, it was a combination of what I would call two-legged retail, mom and pop. So we had retail investors that were buying from us and from Stevens. The retail investors are going to be fickle. It may depend on the day as to whether or not they're participating based on what else is happening. You're going to have participation by in-state banks, I would expect. Let's say, for example, like a Simmons or a Centennial, Bank of the Ozarks, those types, all the way down to your more local banks, like a Signature Bank that's down in Fayetteville. You're also going to have, depending on the final structure, you may have some of the bigger institutions. We typically see a good amount of insurance participation from smaller insurance companies because there's a collateral requirement in the state of Arkansas that if you have policies that you have to hold a certain amount of collateral, it held by Arkansas, collateralized by Arkansas paper. So I would expect to be a little bit across the board. It's a little too small to see the big accounts like a BlackRock or a Nuveen necessarily. They may, if we have a term bond that's large enough, typically they need liquidity. But these buyers would typically be more buy and hold, where say a BlackRock or Nuveen, if they have fund redemptions, they need the ability to sell it, and the bigger the deal is, the more liquid it is.
Daniel, maybe you could just give us a few minutes defining what an underwriter does.
Sure. So the underwriter, when we think of selling bonds, the underwriter is the one who actually sells the bond. We, as the advisor, we will be involved in preparing the rating process, dealing with the rating agencies, structuring of the deal, and there would be input from both underwriters involved in that. But when it comes time to actually offer the bonds to investors and get those commitments, that's going to be the job of the underwriter. They're going to be leading the marketing efforts in discussions with accounts, with the direct investors, and then if there are, let's say we get to a point at the end of an order period on the day we sell bonds, and there is a portion that is unsold, that's where an underwriter steps up and they essentially take the balances to finish off the transaction, and they take risk at that point.
Okay. Any questions for Daniel at all? Mark Kleiner, can you hear us at all?
I can hear you. I've been hearing you, and I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So just bouncing back to the fire projects, you probably heard Bunny speak about his company. Do you have any words of wisdom at all?
I do, and I apologize. I do these Zoom meetings all the time, and for some reason, I just couldn't get connected here. But I have been watching you on the computer and listening to you on the phone. I just couldn't speak. But anyway, I'll make it quick. I have worked with JBP before on projects, and I don't know if Bunny's still listening, but I think he could probably be the first one to tell you that he and I kind of worked at odds at first on the first project we worked on, because construction management was really kind of a new concept. And as we began to work together, and he found that I was being a true advocate for the city, which is what I would be and have been for the city of Bella Vista. That is, I'm advocating on your behalf and on the behalf of your taxpayers and citizens, and the city council and the mayor's office, and in particular the fire department. And we do that in a way that's not confrontational. We just ask a lot of questions. Sometimes the architects and the engineers get tired of hearing our questions, but somebody has to do that. In other words, and if you don't, what tends to happen is the budget gets busted, and the end product is, although it may be a beautiful end product, everybody's pointing the fingers at us as the constructor. You know, what did we do wrong? Well, so that's the main reason I got to be a construction manager to begin with, was to work on those things at the beginning so that we didn't have to make excuses at the end, because we always bring our projects in on budget and ahead of schedule, we feel like, and we've got a great track record of that. But anyway, JBP and the other consultants that they've selected, we've worked with all of them, and we find them to be very, very competent. They listen. They don't take what we say in a confrontational way. They take it as a constructive thing, and they work with us, and we try to stay out of their way when it comes to the design, because that's not what we do. We just know when design is going to cost more than what the city's willing to spend. And so we're going into these projects with a set budget, and we intend to hold to that budget or even do better. Any savings we have goes back to the fire department and to the city, and hopefully we'll help them buy equipment or other things that they need to furnish these stations and make them work even better.
Great, thank you, Mark. Councilors, just so you have an idea as to the time frame for the plans, Gail, I believe the drawings to get to construction grade would be anywhere from 8 to 10 months. Is that still true?
Yes, sir.
Great. And Bunny, I think it'll be a little faster on the fire projects. I think we were talking anywhere from 7 to 9, 7 to 8, perhaps less.
Yeah, well, we're going to work to y'all's schedules. That would be certainly within reason, but there are ways to expedite that if necessary. So, one of the first things we'll do as a team is establish schedules and milestone goals and work to achieve them. So, and that includes, city review, other agency reviews, bid periods, what's going on in the construction market. So, Mark and I will work together and to establish a schedule based on y'all's goals.
Great, thank you. Councilors, before we, yes, Larry. You got to take it off mute, Larry. Larry, you're on mute. Okay, we seem to be having problems connecting to you again, Larry. Okay, thank you, guests, and we look forward to working with you, and we'll let you get back to your evening and your families. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Bye. Okay, we still have some guests with us. We've got Leslie Ann and Lori. Leslie Ann is our, as you probably gathered from Doug and the Duck story, she's our animal control officer. And Lori, I'm sure you have some fancy title, Lori, but you're sort of the chief poobah out at the animal shelter with a great deal of knowledge and experience. And I want to thank you for everything that you do out there. And at times it's not easy. And I'm quite sure at times it's a little heartbreaking as well when you see the condition of some of the animals that are actually brought in. So the first piece of old business that we have in your packet is to have a third reading of Steve's amended ordinance. And then in your packet on item G, Doug has also presented an amendment, and Leslie Ann and Lori, I know that you've had a look at it. I'm hoping all the counselors have had a chance as well. If you want to go through the proposed amendment by Mr. Fowler and give your thoughts, I'm appreciative, Doug, that we've finally taken dog licenses off the table. And they seem, we have an option in Doug's amendment that owners can have some sort of a name tag on the collar, or they can get the dog chipped. And I suspect many of them will understand that chipping is probably a better way to go. And then he has some reclamation fees in there as well. Part of the amendment contains language that is in the current piece of legislation, and other parts of it are new. So, Leslie Ann, Lori, I'll yield the floor to you.
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for allowing us to attend tonight. We did have a chance to look over, and I think we just had a couple notes that we wanted to go over. The first one in section 425, letter C, the prior to destruction of any dog found running at large. So the notice for the certified mail, is that something that legally has to be in there? Because we've never run into a situation where we've had to put a dog down.
That's in our current ordinance. That's a current requirement.
Okay, yeah, we've never run into it. We've never had to do that before because we've never had to destroy somebody's dog. So,
but that is part of what's in the current code that we didn't change. This is basically just it's restating the whole thing with the modifications in it.
Okay, perfect. All right. And then, so the penalty for, is there one? I mean, will I be able to write a ticket on this if I see a dog without a collar and tags?
Sure. It would be a violation, and we've got our general penalty provisions in the code, so absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. Perfect. And then the other thing that we were looking at under section 426, where it talks about the reclamation fee of $35 shall be paid unless the dog is microchipped prior to that, we would love to see put in there, not just prior to, but prior to or at the time of reclamation. So if the dog is chipped before when I impound it, if it's already had a chip, and then if they chip it when they pick it up, that's what we're looking at, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you had an animal and you had it chipped and you knew who it belonged to, would you be impounding it?
There have been cases where, yeah, because the information may not be up to date. I may have an old address, an old phone number. It may have changed owners, or they may be out of town, and I have no way to re-secure the animal.
Well, I mean, this is Mr. Fowler's proposal. So if he wants to say that, then the draft could be changed.
Okay.
But obviously, if they've come to the shelter, you would be the shelter would be doing the chipping, right? It could be offering the chipping or not.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking about this practically. Someone shows up and you've got their dog, and you say, "Okay, if you'll let us chip it, it's $35 or it's $20. If you don't, it's going to be $35." And at that point, they're going to make a choice and say, "Well, go ahead and chip it." Now, will you be charging for the chipping, I assume?
That's what the $20 is for.
Yeah.
Is to pay for the chipping.
Yeah, that'll go to the shelter.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the $20 that is actually just going to be the cost of the chipping, and then like on a first impoundment, the $35. That's just it doesn't go toward anything. I guess they'll just pay that and get their dog back without a chip. So, okay. But they would, if they decide they wanted to do the chipping, then they're not going to be, you're going to chip it and then give them the dog. So it would be prior to reclamation, right?
At the time of.
Well, I guess I'm not.
You're not going to hand them the dog back until the chip is put in unless they pay more money. Right. So
when they
prior to reclamation.
So I think, so I guess maybe I'm reading it wrong. I guess I was reading it, if we bring a dog in that already has the microchip.
Okay.
How were you reading?
Well, it would have been microchip prior to reclamation if you brought it in. It's already been a chip.
If it already
you would
has
not be charging.
And then more at the time of
So I'll be honest with you. Whenever I was thinking about this, and I went and visited with Jason, I'm remiss on my part. I was thinking, well, the dog, if it comes to the shelter, either it'll have a chip or it won't have a chip. I didn't think about in the case where if you bring it in a chip and it isn't current, and it's not. I don't know. I haven't even really thought about that, how to write that in there. I mean, should they be penalized if it already has a chip, but it's not current?
Well, if you look back on the draft of 4-25, the draft requires a physical tag on the collar with current owner's name and address, or a microchip referencing the current owner's name and address. So if it has a chip that is not current, then they would be in violation of this.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And unfortunately, when people move or change a phone number, the last thing they think about is changing that microchip information.
They may not even, and they're not trying to be bad about it. They just don't think about it. Probably.
They just don't think about it.
Yeah. So, so you would have a circumstance where you'd have a dog with the chip that's not current, that is now been taken to the shelter. So, you could do one of two things. Either you could leave it the way it is and it's been chipped and they've paid the lesser fee, or you could modify it to say, we could add something about, updating the information or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know as I sit here I don't want to draft that on the fly.
Right.
Changing something to address a situation where you have a chip but it doesn't do you any good, basically, because it's not accurate.
Yeah.
How do you update the chip?
But let me add this. This is Doug's proposal, so it's not for me to change. So if that's what Doug, those are just suggestions I'm saying would fix this. I don't know what direction Doug wants to go in.
How does one update the chip? I know that we had to do it on our dog. It was a phone call. Is that typical, Lori, Leslie, as to how it's done? So we have
you contact the company and update the information.
So they can actually do it
online
of reclamation. They could call from the shelter.
They should be able to.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So we could just write something in there that, if the owner agrees, to, just update the information on the chip. And provide proof to you within like 7 days or something like that, then
the more processes and forms and procedures you put in, I'm thinking the more difficult it's going to be for the shelter, but I would leave that up to them. One thing you might want to think about is adding a line to each of these that just says, if a dog is microchipped but the information is not current, then the current information shall be provided prior to reclamation or something. And then it would be up to, I don't know if there's a fee to update the information on these databases. It may depend on the database. That's something I'd have to rely on the experts there to talk about. But as a principle, if the dog is chipped, do you want to charge them more, the higher rate, if it's not current, or do you want to treat them as chipped because we've incentivized chipping and just make sure when they pick it up that we get the accurate information?
I would say yes, the latter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you guys agree?
I would.
Okay. Yeah. Leslie, so this is just a work session we're talking about it. What I can do is come and meet you guys again this week and we can kind of talk through that. You know, you guys are really great to talk to, and we'll land on where we want, just kind of like where we talked about what we talked about today, Leslie. It's kind of like a give and take process, and we'll sit down and we'll figure that piece out to what you're comfortable with. Now, what about the fee, the $35? You mentioned today that you think that might be a little too steep. You think maybe 25 and 20?
I kind of think it might be. I think we had discussed 25, and I discussed that with Lori too, for first offense. It's just, you know, with the economy the way it is and how many people we have with fixed incomes in our city, I just think it needs to be lower.
But then, what you'll do is help them to understand that if the dog does come back, right? So if it's 25 and 20, then it comes back the second time, it's 50 or 20. So it's going to be a steeper fine. So that's incentive as well to go ahead and get the dog chipped.
Well, and now, of course, there is not a first-time fee that's paid. But the second time, they pay a fee, and they usually get a citation.
Okay. So there's
second and third offense.
There's a pretty good incentive to have your dog chipped that first time.
Right.
Okay.
Well, Doug, here's a question I have. Say a dog comes in the second time, they got the microchip the first time, and if they come in the second time, do they pay the $50 or does it do it as read unless the dog is microchipped?
I don't think so, no. That was the whole thing, was just to get the dog chipped.
Yeah, they would pay the
What you're hoping for now is where you guys were going with this in the first place. First of all, there were two things we were trying to accomplish. Take dog licensing, out of city responsibility because it's just difficult to keep up with. It causes too many administrative problems and headaches. That was kind of the first thing. And then the second thing was, we talked about mandatory chipping, and it just didn't feel like the right thing to do for a majority of the council. And with that mandatory chipping, what you were hoping to accomplish is a dog you would pick up, Leslie would be able to scan that chip and get that dog home without bringing it to the shelter, right? But evidently, that doesn't necessarily occur every single time. Owner may not be home, you can't get in contact with them or whatever, so you still have to bring it to the shelter. But I think, so you would have had to dealt with that even in the originally proposed ordinance because that situation might still happen. But if that dog is microchipped, that was like the big topic. That was the main thing you wanted to accomplish.
Right.
That dog is microchipped and it has to come to the shelter because you can't get in touch with the owner, they're not home or whatever. I would kind of like lean on your feedback. If you think that dog, when you can get in touch with that owner, if they're going to come and pick it up and it was microchipped and they were responsible enough to do that, maybe there shouldn't be a fee. Other than if you have to board the animal for a day or two or three and you think you need to charge them for that.
So are you saying to leave it as a judgment call?
You can't do that. You can't. I mean, there's going to be a fee collected, and you can't just decide willy-nilly, well, we'll charge you, we won't charge someone else. We've got to treat everyone the same. So, I mean, one thing I don't want to speak for Leslie there, but if let's just assume we've done this, you've caught a dog, the dog has a chip, maybe the address is accurate, but no one's home, and so you've got to do something with the dog. You're going to take it to the shelter, or if you can find the owner at home, I would assume you're going to take the dog to the home, and then Leslie may, could also write that person a citation for dog at large because it would have gotten loose. It still is subject to all those requirements as well. So, so there would be that to deal with too. So they're going to be paying something related to that in terms of a court fine of the dog at large. But if you're gonna take it to the shelter, we need to treat everyone the same in terms of how whatever those categories are. We can't have judgment calls in there.
Let me ask you something. Let me ask you, Jason. What about people that are pulled over for speeding and you give one person a ticket, then the officer decides not to give the next person a ticket.
Well, that's just enforcement discretion. That's a police officer's call, basically. But how does that relate to the animal? I mean,
Well,
giving
it feels like it's the
some large and some people not.
I don't know. It feels like it's the same thing. It's kind of a judgment call depending on the situation.
Well, you're talking about writing a citation, and there is a judgment call related to a citation. What I'm saying there's no judgment call on is when the dog is taken to the shelter and the city has a reclamation fee to reclaim the dog. How do we determine who's not going to pay it?
Okay, I hear you. So what we could do is if it has a chip and you just simply can't get a hold of the owner, you could charge a minimal fee. You could charge a different fee. It could be $10. It doesn't have to be $20 for a chip, $30 or $25 or $35 if it doesn't have a chip. If it has a chip, no one's at home. Everything's updated. They did everything right, except for they weren't at home when you try to get in touch with them or whatever. Then you can charge a minimal fee to get the dog back.
But keep in mind, in that circumstance, they've been violating our ordinance of dog at large. So they're going to be cited for that. They could be cited for that, and they will pay for that. So, if you want to, we're talking about one thing. We're talking about a fine for violation. Another thing, we're talking about an animal shelter fee to reclaim your dog, which is not necessarily related to any violation.
That's not our fee, though.
Right, that's our fee.
Right.
That's what? I'm sorry.
That fee, it's not the shelter fee. That is the reclamation fee goes to the city. The shelter does not keep that money. That goes to the.
One is you've got to be convicted of something. The other is a fee we charge for services, which is a different thing. One, you're talking about a penalty, criminal penalty. The other is just a fee we charge to get your dog back. That's not a criminal penalty. Did I lose people there?
Can we do that? So can we I think we have something here that we can work with for sure. Can we just sit down again and massage a little bit this week and come back with another proposal? I mean, just to kind of get it where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Fine with me if that's what you want to do.
Because I don't think we're that far away.
Where does that leave us with our third reading next week?
I need to address that because Steve, I'm going to call it your ordinance. It didn't start that way, but I'm going to call it yours because your amendment was adopted. Yours is at the third and final reading. What Doug has proposed is technically a whole brand new ordinance. It's not an amendment to this. It's a whole brand new thing. So legally, the council could adopt this ordinance, could adopt your ordinance, and then in 3 months adopt Doug Fowler's ordinance and change it all again. So that's kind of how that works.
Sure enough. I think, the purpose of my amendment there was to avoid mandatory chipping. And I'm gonna continue to oppose mandatory chipping, even in kind of the case that's mapped out here. So I hope that's an area you guys might consider an adjustment to as well. I could get on board with this if this is preferred over the amendment that's headed into its third and final reading. I can get on board with this if we can remove mandatory microchipping. I think this would be a very few number of cases. We're talking about the third impoundment, and the fee goes up. So this feels, the way as Jason just explained it, with the reclamation fee going up each time, it doesn't feel like a fee for service. It feels like punitive action being taken. It doesn't get more expensive the second time you impound the dog. It was really the cost to impound the dog is the same as it was the first time. So it does feel punitive in nature. And then even in those very few circumstances where we will have the dog impounded for the third time and the dog owner is just dead set I don't want my dog chipped for whatever reason, personal belief about chipping and what it might entail, personal protection of their puppy for whatever reason. They don't want the skin penetrated with a chip in it. That's going to be their call to make. I don't mind that there's a higher cost in that third time around, but I don't think we ever, as a city, will take somebody's dog, even if it's off the street, take them over and insert a chip in it without their approval. And I'm surprised really that we're comfortable from a legal standpoint, even that we can put a chip in a dog without the owner's approval.
Well, just for what it's worth, and I was opposed to microchipping as well, mandatory, right? Mandated. But I read 3 ordinances in full, Fayetteville, Rogers, and Bentonville, and 2 of those 3 cities have mandatory chipping of dogs and cats. So just for what it's worth, I mean, it is out there. I just feel like if you're an owner of a pet, I mean, you've had 2 opportunities, and by the third one, of course, if it comes in the third time, you know who the animal belongs to. You don't really need a chip because they've already been to reclaim it twice. But I hear you. I just thought by the time, like I said, it's kind of the old 3 strikes rule, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wouldn't support mandatory chipping. If somebody's dead set, they'd rather pay $100 than have their dog chipped. Let's pick $100, whatever it is, or $75 as it's proposed here. But in addition to that, I do think Jason's context for the fee needs to be factored here. It doesn't seem like a progressive fee makes sense in that context. So I think that part's got to be worked through as well. Maybe it's the same fee every time. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you create incentive around that. I mean, there needs to be a choice. You can pay your money or you can have your dog chipped. Most people are going to chip their dog. The vast majority are. It's the ones who choose not to. I think I stand in opposition to mandatory chipping somebody's animal without their approval.
And
fee the same every time. Make it $35 all 3 times. If it's 3 times, don't make it progressive.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Keep paying your $35. It's going to be $35 every time we pick up your dog. Hey, do you want to have your dog chipped? And then we won't have to play this game anymore.
Well, I guess we'll find out next week if this moves forward for everybody to vote on, because no one else has given an opinion yet. So
Leslie Ann and Lori, when I was there chatting with you, when I was riding along with Leslie Ann, you had mentioned that there had been studies, I guess worldwide, the UK comes to mind, on the success of chipping and how the public really felt that it was probably the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the UK, it's mandatory chipping, and they've got probably about a 98% of their animals chipped.
And was there any backlash at all? Do you know? From the public? No.
And the majority of the dogs, the first year of the program, were chipped. So they took to it right away.
All righty. Ladies, thank you for joining us. We've, I think, pretty much beat this one to death.
Hey, Mayor, I'm not sure. There's council members we haven't heard from yet, and I think
that's where I'm going next, Steve. Hang on. I'm getting there. Doug, did you have one more thing you wanted to add?
No, not at this point. I'd just be curious if anybody else has any,
Okay. Linda, any thoughts?
I'm very much in favor of chipping and doing away with licensing. And that's what I've said from the beginning. Let's get the city out of the license business and promote chipping.
All righty. Thanks. Woz?
Be a responsible dog owner. Chip him.
For her. Okay. John?
I think Linda has given dogs a lot more thought than I have, so I agree with whatever she thinks is wise.
Okay. And Larry, I don't know if you can hear us to weigh in on this. Okay, I guess we've lost Larry. Okay, thank you one and all again. Doug, thanks for taking the time on this. Ladies, thank you for joining us. And also meeting with both myself and Doug, and I suspect Steve was probably out there too. And again, truly thank you very much for all you do for our loved ones that sometimes we unfortunately don't pay as much attention to as we should. So we'll let you get back to your families and we'll continue on with the agenda. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Okay. Now we'll start going through the new business. A lot of these, I think, are going to be discussed by both Doug and Derek.
Probably just me.
Just you? Okay. Because Derek seems to be fading in and out as well. Okay, so Doug?
I think Derek's sticking around for the trail status update.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I don't want to hold him all the way through all this. Derek, are you there? Derek?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I don't want to keep you through everything else just to report the trail status. So can you give council members, please, an update of where we are with the trails?
Yes, sir. I'll start with the contract that we have with Crossland Heavy Contractors to complete the tunnels and bridges project. As we've discussed recently, there's one more tunnel remaining on this project, the Central Trail System. This is the one on Forest Hills Boulevard, just past Camden Road. And a couple of key updates that I just wanted to share. These will be brief bullet points. The Shoofly, that's the detour road to allow the construction and the digging, that has been constructed, and traffic rerouting for that activity is anticipated to begin Thursday of this week. Approximate time frame to finish this tunnel. The contractors are planning on 8 weeks for construction on this one. So that puts them to complete this by the middle of August, this being the last tunnel. Regarding the bridge just south of Trafalgar crossing Little Sugar Creek, the last of the 3 bridges, the project coordinator there today it has updated his schedule, and they're indicating that they are to be ready for a final inspection there by the 10th of July. And lastly, I was just going to offer that they've received punch lists from CEI on the infrastructure that they've completed, and they are about 50% working through the list that they've received previously, and are actively working on plans to punch out just very minor items on the most recent inspections.
Derek, have you been speaking to Cassie? Just so everybody knows, Cassie's back to work. She's actually working from home because of concerns, of course, for the little fellow. She doesn't want to bring something home. So that Cassie, can be posting on the various social media that on Thursday, the bypass will be starting up on 279, 8 weeks to completion, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, sir. I will. I'll send Cassie a note just as soon as I get off of this meeting and let her know so that we can get that press release out ASAP.
Okay, great. Are there any questions for Derek? All right, sir. We'll let you get on with your evening. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Derek.
Yes, sir.
I'll just add, Mayor, that the Blowing Springs to Metfield Trail is under construction in the park, and the excavation is taking place. Survey stakes have been placed all the way through the park, and they're expected to be in the park for the next. Derek, how long did they say? The next month, or 6 weeks, 8 weeks in the park, and then they would be done with most of the park, and then They'll come back at the very end to finish up some things at the very front of the park by the check-in station.
That's correct. It looks like by the beginning of July, they're anticipating moving on out of the park with erosion control and cut and fill excavation on out of the park. So, like you said, moving north up from there, and they anticipate to be there by early July. So they should be out of Blowing Springs by then. And then basically moving just step by step all the way north to Metfield, and then only at the very end then coming back and finishing out the remainder of Blowing Springs kind of in the winter when activity in the park should be lower in late November and December.
Alrighty, thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn over the next few ordinances to Doug. These ordinance changes should be familiar to them or to you because we talked about it as part of the discussion after the last work session. So, Doug, you want to start with A and take us through it?
Sure, thank you. Yes, the mayor mentioned these changes are not to institute more rules and regulations for the citizens of Bella Vista, but these are recommended changes that have come about over the last 18 months of communication with citizens, builders, a lot of feedback with staff, many meetings with staff. Many of these, when I came the first month and sit down with staff and ask what's working, what's not working, which ordinances do you like, which ones do we need to change, most of these were things that they wanted to see some change in. And so as a result of probably over 25 conversations with local builders that build a lot of properties in the city and talking with inspectors in other jurisdictions, checking their requirements and ordinances. These are some of the changes that are recommended. And the first one, letter A, the fence height across the front of a property. Currently, we are permitting fences across the front of the property at 4 feet high. And that is in a violation of the ACC's maximum height, which is 3 feet. So we are recommending that we change our maximum fence height from 4 feet to 3 feet. And because we get a lot of calls from citizens who want to know why we allowed them to build something that's in direct violation with the ACC. And I know the ACC's got established rules that they've had around for years and years. And then only the few times that I've been over there to ask about some of these changes, I decided that the best way to go about these would be for us to try to align a couple of things with them. And this would be for fence permits moving forward. We wouldn't drive around and write notices for fences that were already permitted in the past.
So they're grandfathered.
Yeah, and you know, there's probably not many out there that the ACC has not noticed that exceed 3 feet. I'm sure there are some.
Are there any questions for Doug?
Doug, is it your understanding that the ACC would not agree to go with a 4-foot fence?
It's my understanding, Steve, that in the couple of times I've been over there asking for help aligning with some of our differences, that wasn't a favorable result.
So we haven't asked about this one specifically, but you're saying based on other conversations you've had, there doesn't seem like there's any flexibility there. Is that the case?
Based on other conversations, and I have spoken with about this one. It's been some time.
Okay. Would this, if we make this adjustment, does that complete all of the variances between what the ACC allows and what the city allows? Or are there others?
It wouldn't complete it, but this is by far the most common one that we get calls about.
Yeah.
I don't have a list of other differences that I'm going to come to you next month with the ACC and ask you to change. This is the most common.
Do we need any wording about grandfathering of existing fences, or is this, can we say from this point forward? Jason, how does that part work?
It's in there in section 2. There's a section that says not to be codified. The requirements of section 1 of this ordinance only apply to fences newly constructed on or after the effective date of this ordinance. Fences in existence as of the effective date of this ordinance are allowed. Now, of course, that only means allowed as it relates to our requirements. It doesn't make something maybe privately in violation of covenants okay, but for our purposes, it would be allowed.
Got it.
Anybody else?
Well, I think this is prudent. I think anytime you can make things simpler, it's always the way to go. And I think I admire the department for noticing problems and correcting them.
It's not a fun phone call when you permit a fence and then a month later you get a call that they had to tear it down. It was a $2,000 fence. And so that's something we're trying to prevent.
So Doug, would you, but in fact, I think we talked about today, have all these go to third and final?
That's fine with me, Mayor. The only one that I think they may not agree with doing that on is number C, the property maintenance code. We can definitely discuss that.
Okay. Yeah, because it has to be published first. Okay. If there are no questions, then we'll move on to B.
Well, one more question. Jason, do you know if the ACC, do they have authority over everybody in the city limits or only those people in POA territory?
I don't ever give advice or interpret their private regulations. But on this one, I can tell you, the ACC only has control over properties that are subject to the Bella Vista Village Declaration and Covenants. If you're in the city of Bella Vista, but you're not in the POA, if you're in some of the island property, if you're in some of the outlying newly annexed properties, you are not subject to ACC rules at all.
How big do we have any idea how big is that population? People that that live in our city limits, but they are not members of the POA?
I don't know in terms of population. I know if you look at a map, it used to be when we first incorporated, you look at a city map and it kind of looked like Swiss cheese. It just had these little holes and they were very small. The largest one, I think, probably noteworthy would be the one in the Robin Road area off of 279. There was a pretty big amount of acreage up there that was never a part of the Cooper development. In fact, they had their own private water thing and everything going up there. I couldn't tell you in terms of population. I think I would feel comfortable in saying probably about 97 or 98% of our population lives in the POA part of Bella Vista, and the rest don't.
Yeah. So we'll forego the opportunity to approve somebody's 4-foot fence that is not subject to ACC regulation by adopting this amendment.
The 3-foot limitation would apply citywide, whether you are in the POA or not, if you approve this.
Thank you for clearing that up. That's useful. Sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Doug, let's go on to the next one.
Okay. Letter B and letter D go hand in hand. And this is by far and away the most common concern and complaint that I have gotten from builders since I have been here is the city's requirements for a footer underneath a newly constructed house. And what this recommendation does is two things. Letter D actually raises the frost line in Bella Vista, which is set by city code from 24 inches to 18 inches. Because when we look at charts that describe the frost line, those depth requirements are much further north than the state of Arkansas. And when I consult with the state of Arkansas plumbing inspector, he is in agreement with even lower than 18 inches. And some jurisdictions around us go to 12. And so our depth requirement for a footer is much lower than the jurisdictions around us. And what that does is it makes a builder even though they only install 12 inches of concrete, that's another row or two of CMU block that you see around the foundation that they have to install on top of the footer. And so that raises their cost on the build, depending on the square footage of the house, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. So this is not a International Code Council requirement. This footer detail that we can share with you here with our rebar and depth requirements is something that was put into the city code by the city when all the ordinances were drawn up. And so we're comfortable, after many discussions with builders around town, builders in other jurisdictions, our engineers, our plans examiners, and planning staff, with asking that the depth of the frost line in Bella Vista be raised to 18 inches. Yeah, if you don't mind. And then the second part, letter B, this is our rebar requirement. So every house in Bella Vista, if you drive by when they're digging a footer, the long black lines, those are number 4 rebars that you will see 3 in a row, and they are all resting on chairs. They have to be in the bottom third of the footer, but they have to be off of the ground. And then the crossbars, we require, city code requires 1 every 24 inches. And that's a big expense for builders here, when all of our neighboring jurisdictions only require 2 of those black bars that run through there, 2 runs of rebar. Fayetteville has just a hair more requirement, but Bentonville, Springdale, Rogers, Pea Ridge, Gravette, those jurisdictions only require 2 runs of rebar, which is still a bit overkill on the safe and secure side. When you look at the International Code Council's requirements for footers, it's just 3,000 PSI concrete filled in the trench to the frost line. They don't have to put any rebar in it, according to International Code Council. So through many, many months of discussions with builders who will tell you that they feel confident building a 3 or 4 story house on a footer with only 2 runs of rebar, we are asking that you approve changing the rebar requirements in our footers from 3 runs of rebar with a crossbar every 24 inches to just 2 runs of rebar, number 4.
Doug, or I guess I could ask Doug, do we know where the original requirements came from, why they might have been put in place?
No, sir, I don't.
I can answer that.
All right.
Chris Sunison.
Well, actually, what happened, Doug, was that Chris Sunison and also Daniel Ellis, who's the chairman of the Planning Commission, were tasked by Frank to put in ordinances as quickly as they possibly could. And then they split it up 2 ways. Chris was handling a lot of this stuff, and Daniel was off looking at building codes. And the intent was, let's get it in as fast as we possibly can, because they were working with the municipal league to put the structure around the city. And the intent, Jim, what I've been told was, eventually they wanted to go back and fix it. They knew that there were errors, but unfortunately they just didn't have a chance to go back. And that's what I've been told by Daniel. Jason, I don't know if you were here at the time.
I was around. I know a little about this. That, Mayor, what you mentioned is very true as it comes to our development ordinances and our zoning code. There was a lot of cut and paste in terms of requirements as it relates to some of that stuff related to some of our neighboring cities. This particular requirement we're looking at here is our supplemental provisions to the building code. We adopted, we were a city and I was a contract attorney, and we had Jane was there, and we had the mayor, and then we hired a receptionist. And then I think, I can't remember if it was before or after we brought in the police department. We brought Chris in to be planner and then also in charge of building. And if you recall, you know, when you built a house in Bella Vista before there was a city, the ACC inspected. And so they would follow state code. That was what they did. And they would inspect these places in terms of stuff like we're talking about here. And when the city came on board and the city was going to be doing inspections, we had to adopt building codes to inspect against. And I don't recall if these little extras, these supplemental provisions, were what the ACC had been requiring prior to there being a city, and we carried that over into city code, or if this is something that Chris, in his background, thought we needed to do more of because maybe there had been some sort of foundation problem or something. I don't recall that. But I do know us adopting of course, the building code is adopted by the state. It's a standardized code, pretty much the same everywhere, except for these supplemental provisions. And there was some thought and some rationale related to Bella Vista as it comes to these supplemental provisions. So that part wasn't the cut and paste part, but I just don't remember why it was that this was deemed to be needed. This one.
For a bit of clarity, when you look at the earthquake seismic zones, rebar is not required until you get down to zone D, so it's A, B, C, D. Bella Vista is currently in a B, so we're 2 zones above the requirement for rebar in a footer as required by the International Code Council. So that can give you a little bit of comfort knowing that we're still exceeding what is required, but we're not going the overkill that we have been that drives up the cost. The city of Rogers doesn't require any rebar in any of their footers. This change that I'm recommending here is for houses that are over 1,400 square foot. That's kind of the break off. So currently in Bella Vista, if you build a house that's less than 1,400 square feet, our requirement is just 2 runs of rebar. But if you get above the 1,400 square feet, that's where we jump to the 3 runs with the crossbars. And so most of the houses that are built here are greater than 1,400 square feet. And so that's where this will mainly apply, is to homes that are greater than 1,400 square foot single story.
And another thing, you know, when we first set this up, we didn't have a clue about a lot of this. You know, one of the reasons Chris was hired was for his expertise, and we bought or understood and, you know, took a lot of what he things he said that, yeah, we need to do that. So that's why some of it is maybe more than what it should be. And then, of course, like we said, that we were going to go back, just like when we rezoned everything pretty much at a blanket thing. And then when something come up, we could go ahead and fix the zoning like we've been doing all along.
Doug, I had a question. This is John Flynn. Do you have an idea? I thought I remember the mayor mentioning a dollar figure, how much this would save builders on B and D added together, just roughly how much it would be.
I've heard anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 on the blocks, that the CMU concrete blocks that it will save them, and I've heard $2,000 on the amount of rebar, and so we have heard instances.
Plus, not digging as deep.
That's correct. You're not. The excavation will go down too, but what we're hearing from anonymous sources is that they dig the footer, they lay the rebar down, our inspector goes out and does the inspection. As soon as the inspector drives away, some of the rebar gets pulled up and the concrete gets poured, and nobody ever knows any different. And so if the builders are confident enough that they're going to risk losing the ability to pull permits in Bella Vista, it just shows you how they feel about the requirement that the city of Bella Vista has. So, but this is many months, and we've got 3 building inspectors with over 28 or 30 years of experience in inspecting homes in several different jurisdictions, and they are all 3 comfortable with this proposed change.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, Doug, do you want to take us to the next one, please?
I'm going to get out of there.
Yeah, you can do that. Thank you. Letter C is the property maintenance code. the 2018 edition. So this property maintenance book, of which I can get you a copy if one.
It's in their packet.
It's in the packet. Okay, it's quite lengthy. Covers quite a bit on existing homes. So this is what we would use to address a problem with the structure that is already there, maybe 10 years old, 20 years old. So our inspectors go out and inspect properties that we have permits pulled on. They can't go out and inspect properties that are already there. And so what we found in some of the other jurisdictions that use the International Property Maintenance Code is that we can use this to address things that are life safety or could harm people, like if a tree falls and hits an electrical panel and pulls it off the house, and we drive by and we see it laying in the yard, and the homeowner is not addressing it, and that could hurt someone. We could use the property maintenance code to issue them a notice that says you need to have an electrician fix your electrical panel. If we drive by or we get a complaint that there's no garage door or the garage door is crunched and it's not working, same thing. A front porch post is gone and the front porch could collapse and hit someone. Or we get a call from a tenant that says, my hot water tank is leaking and landlord's not doing anything about it. Or I have an electrical outlet that sparks every time I plug something in and I'm afraid it's going to burn the house down. A common thing seen on the outside of a house, a hole in the roof, siding falling off. We don't see a lot of that in Bella Vista, but those calls do come in occasionally, and our code officers don't have a way to enforce on those things. So we are trying to come up with a way that would allow us to address those issues when they do come in. The city of Fayetteville has their own property maintenance code. The city of Rogers uses this exact 2018 International Property Maintenance Code. So it's the city of Little Rock has their version of this that they use as well. So it's not uncommon for cities to use these to address existing homes. And so we're open to discussion and questions about how you feel about this and how you feel about us addressing these things. But this is something that's come up since I've been here from our code officers and building inspectors when it comes to items that we can't inspect.
Which really impacts, of course, the property values. And that's what we've got to keep up are the property values.
A couple other things this could address is we get a call that says there's 15 people living in this house. We don't have a way to go verify that or even ask a homeowner that information. If we get a call that says there's people living in the house with no water, people living in the house with no power, people living in the house with no sewer, this property maintenance code allows us to go inspect those things.
Doug, on one of your examples there, you mentioned we have no way of knowing if 15 people live in a house. What's the maximum number of people that can live in a house according to that code?
It's based on square footage and bedrooms and bathrooms. So it's, 2-3-bed, 2-bath house is certainly much smaller than a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house. I can send you the exact, it's per square footage. So it varies from, 4 to 10. It just depends.
But it does exist here, Steve. I've gone out with the fire department and the Red Cross when annually they give out free smoke detectors. And you go into some of the neighborhoods and there's 4, 5, 6 cars in the front of 1,800 square feet. And it's on a septic, and the septic's only been built for probably a family of 4. And yet there are a lot more people living in there. And again, we have no teeth at all. Linda, you've been patient. I think you have some comments.
Well, yeah, 2 particular things. One is this particular code specifies that in order to be considered habitable space, it must have a window. There are thousands of townhouses with captive bedrooms that have no windows. So if we adopted this code, that makes all of those bedrooms not habitable space, which potentially makes a 2-bedroom townhouse or a 3-bedroom townhouse 1 bedroom less, which could adversely affect property values in resale. The other big issue I have is I totally understand from a maintenance standpoint how we have to have teeth in.
Doctor.
Oh, we lost her.
I did visit with Linda earlier today about this, and her concern, unless she gets back on, is you go ahead. Yeah. Are you there, Linda? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The biggest problem that I have with it is if we're saying that every place in Bella Vista has to comply with it, what do you do when you transfer a house? Who certifies you're in compliance? And what if you're not? Who's liable? The buyer, the seller, the realtor, or whom? And I've sold real estate in 7 different states, and only one place have I sold real estate where the house had to be brought up to code. The code guy had to go out and do an inspection. If we enact this ordinance in order to accomplish Doug's goals, who certifies what when a property is sold, and what happens if it isn't in compliance?
Jason?
Let me, I think, I looked, I was aware that Linda had this question. In looking at the code itself, I'm looking at section 107.6, transfer of ownership. And what it does is and I'll just read it to you, it's not too long. It shall be unlawful for the owner of any dwelling unit or structure who has received a compliance order or upon whom a notice of violation has been served to sell, transfer, mortgage, lease, or otherwise dispose of such dwelling unit or structure to another until the provisions of the compliance order or notice of violation have been complied with, or until such owner or the owner's authorized agent shall first furnish the grantee, transferee, mortgagee, or licensee a true copy of any compliance order or notice of violation issued by the code official, and shall furnish to the code official a signed and notarized statement from the grantee, transferee, mortgagee, or lessee acknowledging the receipt of such compliance order or notice of violation and fully accepting the responsibility without condition for making the corrections or repairs required by such compliance order or notice of violation. So if there is you can buy and sell as normal or mortgage, but your limitation is only going to kick in if there has been a notice of violation sent. And even so, it can transfer if the person who's going to be buying the property or the bank gets this acknowledgement and knowledge and agrees to bring it into compliance. There's not a process of certifying it to be in compliance. It would be a lack of a notice of violation. So, I mean, if someone's doing title work on a house, they might, at most, they might call CDS and say, are there any pending notices of violation related to an address? And the city could say yes or no. If it said yes, then they know they're going to need to either bring it into compliance or acknowledge that it exists and agree to fix it themselves. Or if it's not, then they're done and due diligence has been complied with, and there would be nothing else on this particular issue. I don't know of a requirement that require us to, and I don't know that we ever would certify compliance with the law ever.
Oh, we've lost her again.
That made sense to me, Jason, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I had read most of that, but I hadn't gotten to that section. So thank you for finding that. What do we do about the thousands of captive bedrooms?
Well, you've got a good question there. I don't. It talks about habitable. It applies to habitable spaces.
Yes.
When you look at the definition of a habitable space, you get into section 202. A habitable space is a space in a structure for living, sleeping, eating, or cooking. Bathrooms, toilet rooms, closets, halls, storage, or utility spaces in similar areas are not considered habitable spaces. So obviously a bedroom would be a habitable space. And then when you look,
I didn't write down the section, but it mentioned a window.
Yeah, I just, when you mentioned it, let's see, the Windows Habitable 402.1, we look at that. That has to do with light, ventilation, occupancy limitations in general. This is in the light section, section 402.1. Every habitable space shall have not less than one window of approved size facing directly to the outdoors or to a court. The minimum total glazed area for every habitable space shall be 8% of the floor area of such room. Whenever walls or other portions of a structure face a window of any room, and such obstructions are located less than 3 feet from the window and extend to a level above that of the ceiling of the room, such window shall not be deemed to face directly to the outdoors nor to a court, and shall be included as contributing to the required minimum total window area for the room. Now, there is an exception. It says exception when natural light for rooms or spaces without exterior glazing areas is provided through an adjoining room, the unobstructed opening to the adjoining room shall be not less than 8% of the floor area of the interior room or space, or not less than 25 square feet, whichever is greater. The exterior glazing area shall be based on the total floor area being served. And so I don't, I need to talk to an expert about that. But I mean, if you're talking about an open doorway that was meant to provide light from an adjoining room, I think, Doug, I mean, maybe you can add on here, but is that saying the minimum size that doorway would have to be in order to provide enough light to that habitable room that didn't have a window?
Well, wouldn't these be pre-existing non-conforming in any case?
Well, you're talking about a maintenance code, though, Linda. And normally you would be, certainly if you're talking about construction. Let's see. It's going to require continuing conformance. So it's not one of those things you could say, well, it conformed when it was built. Now it doesn't have to. That defeats the whole point of a maintenance code, because it's all about
right.
It needs to be looked into.
Because there's bunches and probably thousands of them.
But obviously a basement would not have a window. And if you look at...
in order for it to be a bedroom, it's supposed to have egress, a window.
Yeah, none of these captive bedrooms have egress or windows. And if you haven't seen one in Bella Vista, Doug, I'd be glad to take you and show you one.
Okay.
I'm going to let the experts in building things answer that one. And deal with that. It wouldn't surprise me at all to have something built like that in Bella Vista. I mean, Doug, does the building code allow you to do that even on new construction?
I wouldn't even put it back.
Well, you wouldn't build them now, but a vast majority of the townhouses that were built into the side of a hill. And if you haven't seen one, Jason, I'd be glad to do a tour.
I'll take your word for it. I know you know all these buildings around here very well.
So, Linda, you're saying that when they advertise these for sale with no window and no egress, they're still calling it a bedroom on the listing?
Absolutely, and the appraisers are appraising them that way because they're using townhouses with similar situations as comparables.
Okay, I think what we'll do here is we'll pull this from the agenda because there has to be some more study done. Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
I'm a man.
Okay. Appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Doug, on to E.
Letter E, this is this would add to our ordinance that addresses weeds, high grass, rubbish. There's just really not anything in there that we're comfortable with addressing obviously dead trees. And we get calls every month.
You missed the frost line? Or did you skip one?
Well, letter D, I thought we'd already talked about it.
We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
We did frost line? Okay. I thought we did rebar. Okay, never mind. Sorry about that.
Go back over it if you.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this would, we get calls monthly about dead trees or maybe a dead tree, and I'm afraid it's going to fall on my car. I'm afraid it's going to fall on my house. And these are most of the time trees on someone else's property. And so we don't have an ordinance that allows us to go out and write a notice for a tree that is obviously dead. And so we feel like if we had something that would allow us to address something that could cause a property, structure, or a person harm, we would be more comfortable writing notices on those, and that results in a citation having some teeth when we go to. This dead trees could be on a developed property with a house. They could be on a vacant lot that has a tree that appears dead that could fall on a neighboring house. I know that in the wintertime it's difficult to tell if a tree is dead or infested with bugs or rot. In the summertime, it's a lot easier. If there's no leaves and there's the small limbs are falling off, it's dead. But in the instances where we feel like in the wintertime where something could fall any day, we might have to consult with a local urban forester or arborist to give us their opinion on the tree. We're not going to drive around and look for dead trees. These come in mainly by complaints, and when there's a situation in which it could cause somebody some harm, we feel like we need a way to address it.
I've spoken to Tom Judson about this as early as this morning, and I told him that this is a reaction. It's not proactive. And certainly, we don't have the people to go out and start looking for trees all over the place, and frankly, neither does he. If it's in the middle of common property and it's not going to hit anywhere if it falls, then let it fall, because that's what happens today anyway. This is more to address a fair number of complaints that I've received about a tree hanging over. It looks dead. And one of the challenges is not so much the POA, but it's the guy who owns the empty lot, whose grandparents maybe bought it, and he has absolutely no interest in doing anything to keep it up at all. And you can write letters till you're blue in the face, but if you haven't got any teeth, he's not going to do anything. And we have run across that before as well.
We've got one now on the east side of town where the tree is leaning on a house, and the owner won't cut it. And instances like that, we feel like something needs to be done before it hurts somebody.
So, Mayor,
I strongly.
Would you
I support that. I had somebody call me the other day about a tree that's getting ready to fall on a house.
Okay,
What was that, Linda?
Linda, say it again, please.
Yes, no, I support this because it's very frustrating when somebody calls you and says, hey, my next door neighbor has a tree that's hanging over my house. I've got 3 kids and I can't get anything done. What do? Wait till it falls and call my insurance company?
Right.
Yeah, I did have someone call me a week and a half ago about one, and went out to look at it, and it's live, but really hanging over the next door guy's house.
Okay. Doug?
No, I was just saying, if the city went out and took care of the problem, I guess would we bill the property owner back?
Yes, there's provision in the language here that recoupment of removal expenses, notices, and procedures. And when a tree on private property has to be removed by the city pursuant to the procedures and notice requirements and sections. Other words, yes.
Sorry about that. I should have read it. I think by the time I got done with the property management code, my eyes were going.
Steve?
Well, yeah, I spoke with Doug a little bit briefly about this morning. It does represent kind of sticky ground in terms of, there's got to be expertise and judgment applied in terms of defining whether or not a tree is dangerous. Is it dangerous to property? Is it dangerous to is it dangerous to the home? I think, I appreciate this because I think a lot of it has to do with, as Doug said, remediation or brokering a complaint from one neighbor to another. But would any property owners, I'm curious about the conversation with the POA and what the context of that was, would any owner be exempt from this? In other words, if I'm adjacent to common property and there's a tree that's about to crush my shed, would the POA be subject to the same notification and citation process as a property owner would be?
Yes, they would be. Yes, they would be. I explained that to Tom this morning, and he said, well, normally we're proactive anyway, and we would go out and remove the tree. But yes, he understands that they are not somehow exempt from this. Anyone else?
You guys are worried about houses. Look at all the trees hanging over power lines. That could affect city blocks, and depending on how long it takes to get that repaired. Tree goes across the wire, brings the pole down, everybody's out for quite a while. Principle's the same. It's either a house or a tree or power line. That's would be a bigger concern to me than a house, because we got an awful lot of power lines pretty close to the edge of the road, and we got a whole bunch of trees in the same boat.
Hey, anybody else?
Carroll Electric is working on that.
They are.
Yeah, the underbrush, and they're doing a good job, but you still look, I got 4 trees on the corner of my house. It'd take out 4 blocks if they came down, because that's how close the power lines is.
They have a clear cut policy on the west side. Holy smokes. Maybe it's just taking a while to get to where you are, Jim, but they are, it's amazing.
A lot of their clear cutting is lower, and they're just cutting branches that are over the wire. But if the whole tree came down, cutting branches, you can do that all day long and not any help. I mean, Carroll does that so the small ones don't come down, so we don't lose power. You know, many years ago, every time the wind blew, we lost power. Every time the snow was heavy, we lost power. And they started cutting back. And that's why they have that policy now. But they're only cutting back the branches that are laying over the tree. If you look how tall the tree is in relation to the wire, there's a whole bunch of them out there.
Well, that's not quite the case out on Sterling Avenue.
Yeah. Oh, no.
They've really gone to town out there. And in fact, some of the residents sent me a petition, which I sent in to the CEO, and they were supposed to remedy it. Last time I saw it there, they had cleaned up some of it. But yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Okay, anybody else? All right, Doug, the final one, F.
Letter F is an ordinance that would allow us to address the fence requirement around a pool. So currently, if you get a permit for an in-ground pool, we do require a fence. But if you construct an above-ground pool, there's no requirement for a fence. The pool itself serves as the barrier. So anything 2 feet or higher than, that a kid could drown in, we feel like needs a fence. And so we get this call, not a lot, but it does come in from neighbors. My kid's running around, and my next door neighbor has a pool, and it's not fenced, and I'm afraid they're going to go get in it. And so I think this would help address that.
Any comments at all?
This would be, I think it's just not retroactive, but moving forward.
Good safety issue.
Say it again, Linda, please.
It's a good safety procedure.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, if there's nothing else, thanks, Doug. We'll move on to Resolution H, which is adopting the Northwest Arkansas Razorback Greenway Operations and Management Plan. This is going in front of all the cities that have the Greenway going through their place. If you had a chance to look at it, there are quite a few provisions, and what they're trying to do is make it consistent throughout all of the cities that have the Greenway, so that everybody understands exactly, for example, what the signage is going to look like. This is how you clean it up. This is how you maintain it. And, if you look at the actual wording of the resolution itself, The purpose is to define the maintenance, management, and operations requirements associated with the off-road and on-road greenway facilities and lands that are located within the city of Bella Vista. The same holds true for all the other cities as well. And the plan has been reviewed and approved by the city departments that are responsible for maintaining, managing, and operating the lands and facilities of the Greenway. This has also been shared with the POA because they're also involved in the maintenance. Doug, any comments from the POA at all? I didn't have any. They seem to be fine with it.
I didn't get any back from John.
No.
It's going to be a very short section, from where the Greenway ends at the little circle where you turn around. Our portion for the near future will only be that short extension under the bridge, around a curve and up over the bridge, and then a hard right as it begins to go back behind the Allen's strip center there. So our maintenance is going to be small until someday, if and when this Razorback Greenway gets extended further north.
And of course, we also have the spur that was opened a couple of years ago, and we take ownership at Dartmoor by the school, and it runs into Blowing Springs.
To some of Doug's points there, I got to spend a little bit of time with this. I need to go further into it, but in the first few pages, I started to get uncomfortable already. I'm curious who prepared this for us.
It would have been regional planning.
Regional planning originally prepared it, and then different cities. So there's 6 cities that have ownership in the Razorback Greenway. They each made some changes that would better fit their jurisdiction. And I believe, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe regional planning sent us, was it Springdale's version? And
it was Rogers' version.
Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
Jason took Rogers' plan and changed it.
We received. I think it was regional planning that changed the Rogers plan to make it suit Bella Vista, put our maps in there, change the references and all of that. I did not do that part of it. I believe that was, it was regional planning. I don't remember where the email came from.
The reason why I ask is there are things in here that I are foreign to me. And I think it confuses the issue of our 2040 comprehensive plan. That's kind of where I want to stay focused. In this case, one of the statements just on page 2, the future Greenway extends approximately 5 miles through the city from the Veteran Parkway following Little Sugar Creek to the Arkansas-Missouri state line. By adopting this plan, it seems like it's tacit approval that there's another 5 miles to be built. And I don't think we can commit to that or subscribe to that in any way at this time. I just don't think there's enough information on the table for us to go there. And that's why the map on 5.8 that lays out the route seems to me very presumptive.
Well, Steve, in 2015, there was a master plan for the city of Bella Vista for the bicycles and the hikers. And that also shows it going right up to the Missouri border. And at that time, and similar to this, we are not committing to build that.
Right.
There would still have to be the same process that we go through today, and it ends up with council. And if you don't want to do it, you vote against it.
Mayor, if I could just add one thing, I think what you're saying, that several years ago, the city adopted a master trails plan, which had a map of trails, but they weren't necessarily going to be built there. They weren't necessarily going to be done. It was just kind of, here's the layout of how we could see it being. And I think that they did draw that Greenway all the way up to the border. And I don't know, it's been many years. I remember writing the resolution. I don't remember what the map showed. It's somewhere. But I do believe it showed the Greenway extension in there. So that to that extent, the city has already adopted a plan saying that it sees that happening. But obviously we're not committed.
Sorry, Jason.
That's okay.
Once upon a time, the city council may have adopted that plan, but this city council hasn't adopted it. And I don't pledge any allegiance to it. I'm not entirely familiar with it, but I just know we're looking forward. We've got a 2040 comprehensive plan. that's on the table in front of us. And I would be comfortable with adoption of this to the extent that it provides for our maintenance of the area at Mercy Way, the short segment that's there, not referencing 5 miles further through the city. I think that's entirely premature.
But you're not committing to the maintenance, is the point, Steve.
Nor am I tacitly. I'm just not interested in something that says the future is a 5-mile path through the heart of Bella Vista, when I think that's entirely premature. I just don't think it's necessary for it to be in there. There's no sense in addressing something like that without it being material.
At the city hall sometime, and we have a copy of the master plan that was adopted by council, and you can go through it because it talks more than just this. But again,
I think it was
the map is
2015.
showing where the trails might be, not where they necessarily will be. Sorry, Linda?
I think it was 2015.
Yes, it was 2015.
Steve,
in all sorts of public meetings. You probably didn't live here at that time, Steve, but the meetings were in all the cities, excuse me, including here, because I can remember going to them. And then it was adopted by council in 2015. The adoption of a master plan or even this document doesn't mean it's going to happen. Far from it. It still has to go through all the legal procedures that we have to go through every time that we're going to do something with the greenway, such as the connector going up to Metfield. If you don't like the connector going up to Metfield, vote against it. And it's the same thing if you don't like extending it 5 miles or whatever it's going to be sometime, probably in the far distant future.
Yep.
Then the council of the day, and you might be part of it, can vote against it.
I think we're looking for trouble by trying to adopt a plan that references those things that are entirely premature.
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I'll disagree with you, but that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, then we go to the next one, which is more of a legal issue. Jason, it's a cooperative agreement between all the cities.
Yes. So currently, an agreement like this exists among the other cities that already have Greenway in them. We are going to be new to the Greenway business. It comes right up to our border, and now we're going to have some of it in there. So all the parties are amending the Greenway Alliance agreement to include the city of Bella Vista. And so that's what this does. This is what in the law is called an intralocal cooperative agreement. These are kind of special types of agreements or special types of contracts that cities can enter into among each other to carry out a common goal. These agreements are submitted to the state attorney general for approval in terms of compliance with the law. She doesn't stand in terms of policy of whether it's good or not. Her General Rutledge just determines whether or not it is legal to do this, and it's up to the parties whether or not to do it. This was submitted by Springdale to the state attorney general. Their office gave their okay, which was the last hurdle we needed to accomplish to get this adopted. And so it's pretty short, but it does it brings Bella Vista into the Greenway Alliance. There's a joint board and other things you can read there in the agreement itself. We would be a part of that. We all, getting back to the prior resolution, we all have adopted a form of that maintenance plan, so it gets everybody on a page regarding commitment, I guess you would say, in terms of things and how it's going to be operated. And so that's what this does. And so we need to have council approval for the mayor to be able to enter into this on behalf of the city of Bella Vista. I believe in your packet is not only the resolution and the agreement, but also the Attorney General's letter to Ernest Kate, the City Attorney of Springdale, where she acknowledged her findings in approval of the form of the agreement.
Thank you. Are there any questions at all? Okay, thank you. We'll go to the next one, which is authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to enter into a contract with OR Colon Associates LLC, the amount of $68,000 $350 for the provision of right-of-way acquisition services related to the Mercy Way Bridge project. Doug, you and I were talking about this before. We've used this company before, as have other cities.
That's correct, Mayor. The RDOT requirement and regional planning requirement for right-of-way acquisition consultant is we sent in an RFP that was approved by RDOT for right-of-way consultants. We received 4. We had a committee of 5 that sat down and graded all 4 proposals, and we selected O.R. Colin and Associates. They do currently work with our street department on some right-of-way projects.
Drive.
And I did call around to other jurisdictions that they had listed in their references and got good feedback as far as their the work that they've done with them in the past. And so I've been in talks with Donna at their agency now for a couple of months, and she has been real helpful in starting this process. We can't actually let her start right-of-way acquisition until RDOT approves the right-of-way plans that were submitted to them by our engineer, Burns and McDonald. They've had those for quite a while, and he's expecting that approval any day. So if you do approve this, she could begin calling those property owners. Our right-of-way for that project is going to be about 8 property owners. And when you include temporary construction easements, there's going to be about 15 pieces that she will be working to acquire for that project to move forward. We're also in talks with all the utility companies. I've received proposals from 2 of them to move their utilities. I'm still waiting on a couple more. So this is their total cost, and you'll see in the package she broke it down per parcel. For her to go out and acquire those properties. It does not include if one of them balks and we have to go to court, and there's additional charges for eminent domain and things such as that. So this is their contract for if everything goes smooth and she acquires those properties for us.
And Jason, if I remember correctly, we went through this process for Suits Us Drive. And
we did. We hired a company to work with us to talk to all the property owners and negotiate sale of necessary right-of-way and easements across in order to accomplish that. And we only had to end up filing one case, and we ended up winning that on default. So this is a very similar type of thing. One of the benefits of this, if I can just be frank with you, is that if you have a third-party company go out and negotiate these things, it de-escalates it, and it becomes much less the government's here demanding my property, and that intermediary of negotiating can bring a calming effect to the whole thing, and it's very useful in order resolving cases. So they're well worth the money, I think, in terms of the service they provide. Unfortunately, we may have people that just are intransigent and say, I'm not selling to you, and that's not legally an option. Then we have to pursue legal remedies. But when you've got a good company that can provide these sorts of services, it does help a project, and it can help a project be less expensive too, actually.
How much right-of-way are we talking about on each side of the roadway?
I'm not sure of the exact number of feet, but it is going to widen from 2 lanes to 4 lanes of traffic, a 10-foot bike path, and a pedestrian walkway. So, I don't know the exact footage. It involves CVS is going to lose a parking spot down there on the corner. The change to the north at the gas station, they have 2 access points there. The one closest to the intersection, they will lose because they're going to reroute that intersection to be a hard right turn instead of a angled out way out onto 71 because they have a lot of wrecks there. So they're redesigning that a little bit. And then as you move east across the bridge where the trail is going to loop around onto some Cooper property, it's quite large there. And then to the south of the bridge, there's 3 Bentonville parcels. Could be 50 feet there, but I mean, it's It's not the entire parcel, but it's a pretty good little swath of property.
So the property purchase cost, that's paid for by the city? Or is that all part of the total package that we estimated?
That's all included in the RDOT money that we can, and when she starts negotiating these, RDOT will have to approve those. So we're using their funds to pay for these. And so each time she negotiates one, RDOT will have to approve the transaction.
You know, just a snippet of a side story. This weekend, I pulled into Sonic to get a Diet Cherry Limeade, one of my favorites. And I pulled into one of the the little bays so I could order. And it was really interesting. As I was pulling in, there was a gentleman. I'm just going to say he was in his mid-30s or so. And he had his bicycle, and he made a pull cart. It was really nifty the way he did it, but he had his 2 young boys in it. And they live in North Bentonville, and they had ridden up, I guess, the Greenway, up across over to Cooper, and they came across the bridge, and he parked in one of the bays and ordered drinks for he and his 2 young boys. His boys were probably 5 and 3. And I actually got out. I said, "Sir, I mean, how did you navigate your way here?" And he told me, and he said it was a little hairy coming across the bridge, once you left Cooper, but he did, came all the way up, came to Sonic. And I asked him if he minded if I took a photo of him. He goes, "Oh, no, that's fine. Absolutely." So I took a picture. It's a little dark because it's in a shadow. But I think, when you're looking into the future, and we're talking about this Greenway and possibilities, people are coming this way. And that is obviously going to give our residents a chance to go south, too. It gives us a chance to share with all the other communities. So I look forward not just to the bridge, but for the future of what the Greenway holds, not just to where it goes right now, but where it might go into the future. It's neat seeing everybody being able to travel north and south like that, unobstructed. So anyway.
I'll add to that, Doug. Fayetteville just added 3 miles to the very south end of the Razorback Greenway. So it just went from 37 miles to 40 miles. And that alone makes it one of the longest designated safe greenways in the country. And so if someday it gets national recognition for that. So if someday down the road, 5 miles get added to this thing to take it to the line, it would definitely be probably not the longest, but in the top handful of longest safe greenways to travel in the country.
Anybody else? Okay, Resolution K, we've already discussed when we had Bunny talk to us, and the same with L. K, of course, is the new fire station. L is the training facility. We go to the last resolution, which is approving the A&P Commission's appointment of Ashley Dozier as a tourism industry position commissioner. Doug, any comments about Ashley?
No, it's exciting for us to be able to, add someone from the, I think, Airbnb community. I think they're actually listed on VRBO, but really nice young lady. Her and her husband, they're a pair. But just somebody from that aspect. Plus, what do I call it? Younger families with children aspect, which I don't think we get a lot of that representation right now. Maybe this will be the start of, more of that dynamic demographic in Bella Vista, coming in and kind of, trying to have some input into what goes on in the city. I will say too, and I will attach a little resume from her. Wayne, I'll pass that along to you so you can include it into the packet. But this young lady she's a graduate of West Point. She's really impressive, really bright. And she had a military career as well. So whenever we had a conversation with her about this position, her husband is just as enthused and kind of informed us they kind of come as a package deal, but we had to tell them that only one of them gets a vote at the commission meeting. So we're excited to have him come on. And, John, he met her online, during our last commission meeting as well. So anyway, we look forward to her.
Great. Any questions for Doug?
I just wanted to add one thing to that. We were very enthused about Ashley, but Doug did take the extra step of publicizing the position so other people would have an opportunity if they had an interest.
Yeah.
So we've gone through that already, and the commission really behind Ashley 100%.
Okay, we'll move into the discussion items. The first three we've already talked about, and in your final packet for next Monday, you will have a resolution for each and the appropriate contracts that Jason is looking at now. Census, we're still leading the state. Last you told me was 78.5.
Yes.
Maumelle is nipping at our heels at 74. The state itself is in the 50-something range.
Yeah, a little below 60.
A little bit below 60. So we have an unused kiosk up at the court that's in Tabitha, or it was in Tabitha's office. At one time, we thought everybody coming in, would actually sign in on this thing, and it just wasn't all that practical. So we have moved it down to the foyer here in City Hall, and I have Sally pulling together contact names and email addresses for all the churches, for all that we can find, and try to work with the churches so that if there are people who do not have internet access, but would feel comfortable coming down to City Hall to spend, it takes no more than just a few minutes to do it, then we could provide the service and we could provide the coaching. And so that's what we meant by the City Hall kiosk. I got to tell you, I'm really, really proud of our residents to be at 78.5. And I think we're probably going to hit into the 80s. And then that makes the job of the census taker that much easier because they do have to go out and start knocking on doors. And I don't know if all of you are on the AML calls that happen every week, but I kind of chuckle inwardly when Whitney has to say that once again, Bella Vista is still leading the state. It's just a nice feeling.
Indeed. Hey, do you know, Mayor, how they calculate that? It's 78% of what? Is it 78% of the population from last year?
78% of whatever their number of people who would be eligible based on their I'm not sure exactly how they come up with it, Steve.
Yeah.
But these are all self responses. This is all stuff that people either did one of the three ways. They responded to the letter, they went online and did it, or they did it by phone.
Right.
Those are the three options right now.
Yeah.
And then what will come later will be the contact, which obviously coronavirus thing is creating a lot of changes for that. So this period of time is longer than it would normally be because of that. But,
yeah. Somebody asked me how they calculate the 78%, and I couldn't answer that question because
I'm not totally sure either.
If you know what the population is, then you don't need to do a census. So it's 78% of something. It must be what the previous population was.
Or of their estimates. They do have an estimate of what they think we have.
All right.
So that might be where they base it on.
Very good.
But John and Eric set up this kiosk, and it's really simple. It's right in the lobby if you want to come and see it. And it's a very simple process to use it. So.
Is that something we can add to announcements going forward at city council meetings? I think that's a great a great way to remind people that if you haven't responded to the census,
we put it on the city's website and also on the Facebook page. So, and like the mayor said, Sally's been trying to contact all the churches, let them know if there are people who need assistance. Originally, we had hoped to have this sort of thing in the library, but of course, with the library not being open, we haven't had that option. So.
Sure.
So the 10 people that watch city council meetings, that means that 8 of them have reported. Is that right? Did I do my math right?
I think it's a percentage of they know the addresses they send the envelopes to, and they know all the addresses. They just don't know how many people are in there. So they know a percentage of response for each address.
Yes.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Jason, because it's based on
self-response. So people who did it based on what they were originally contacted.
So we have somewhere between 14,000 and 15,000 rooftops. That's probably what they're counting as the rooftop.
What now? Rooftop.
Rooftop.
Oh, rooftop. Sorry. All right. Got it.
Been a long call, Steve.
The translation dropped on me there.
Okay. AML convention, I sent all of you a note that came out today. It's going to be virtual. I know Jim was wanting to talk about perhaps all of us paying our own way, but it's a moot point at this point because nobody's going to have to travel to go anywhere. It'll be very interesting to see how they're going to pull this off. Jim, anything?
No, I was going to leave that can of worms in the jar.
Okay. Let's move to Sunset.
I got an update today from John Sainsbury, who is the owner's rep, Dr. Hull's rep, and he says they're sitting on go. They're just waiting on the insurance company called Bitco to approve a dollar amount that they're going to get from this, and then Baldwin and Shell is supposed to get started. But that's the same thing he said at the last update. So they're ready to go. They've got a contractor in place. They just don't have the money from the insurance company. So he says that Dr. Hull's attorneys are pressing them to get that completed, and he's hopeful that it'll be any day.
Long process. Finally, impact fees. We had talked about it once before, and I had asked John to look into it. John, have you got any preliminary position yet?
Yeah, I wanted to just go over, I'll make this brief. I know people are pretty tired. But what we've found out, we've gotten some input from some other communities. Bentonville's impact fees, this is for, I'm just going to quote for a house, because a lot of folks have for a house, for multifamily units, and for commercial have different numbers. Bentonville has $3,234 per house, and it's based on fire, police, library, and parks. And there's actually a specific number for each of those. Pea Ridge has $2,148 per house. It's fire, police, and I believe roads. Lowell sent me a little information. Theirs is on fire and roads. Their information wasn't quite so complete, so I didn't get a number. I did some research online, and a number of the other communities have impact fees as well. A couple key factors. Arkansas has a statute about impact fees. There's also been extensive federal litigation. So it's usually, a couple side points that also I've looked into. Peter brought up about T.H. Rogers and how much sales tax we get from them. They gave us the numbers, and so that's something to keep in mind. We don't want to squash the building business and lose money there. And also I got a lot of information from Mike Button about the roads in Bella Vista, and in particular, the roads we have to pave because somebody has built a house where the road's not paved yet, and what the cost is on that. And it's been, as you can imagine, the last 4 or 5 years, it has steadily gone up. And one thing that was interesting, we put in place this rule that we'd only go 150 feet, and the builders, once we implemented that the last year or two, the builders are tending to build houses that, they used to build them down 1,000 feet down a dirt road into the road. They're tending not to do that. So here's that's working. That's kind of a side point. One of the key things about the impact fees is it appears to me very prudent to have a consultant. Bentonville used a consultant called Tischler Bice. It's out of Bethesda, Maryland. I've done some research on consultants, and there's Tischler Bice out of Bethesda, Maryland. They're mostly national. There's Goodwin Consulting out of Sacramento, California. Duncan Associates out of Lauderdale, Florida. I have a call in the Arkansas Municipal League, couple calls in actually, to get some feedback from them if they have any feedback on consultants. And I'm waiting to hear back from them. When I discussed it with Jason Kelly, he thought it would probably be more than $20,000, which would mean we'd have to go to some kind of a bid process and hire a consultant. But in the case of Bella Vista, it's clear to me the items we would focus on are fire, police, and roads. And those are the things we have that we could base an impact fee on. And it also appears to me that really you're better off getting a consultant pretty early on in the process, because that dictates, you have to justify financially what you charge. So you can't charge more than you can justify financially. And so I think really we need to get the consultant involved pretty early on in the process. My own personal feeling is I think it would be prudent. I think it's something we should definitely do. And I think we should be very careful about the amount. If you start cranking 300 homes a year, if you had a couple $1,000s, that would be $600,000. That would be rather helpful for some of these expenditures. But you wouldn't want to get too big for obvious reasons. I think you need to keep it in a reasonable level. And at any rate, it has to be something the consultant says can be justified.
John, one thing I can add to what you're saying is not only is it another reason it's important to tie those fees to the actual expense is you've got a limited time frame to spend the money. And if you don't spend the money, then you got to refund the money and you got to track all those people down, which if you're overcharging, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, that's one of the things in the statute. You actually have 7 years to spend the money, and you literally, if you can't show you've spent it. So maybe so much is attributable to fire and EMS. If you can't show you've made the expenditure after 7 years, then you have to refund it, which would be arduous. So you want to make sure you have something that's defensible. What happened with Bentonville, actually, they had this firm out of Bethesda, Tischler Bice, and they indicated to me that they did have litigation, and the firm was their expert witness, and they won the litigation. So not only is the consultant helping you do it in a logical way, but then you have somebody built in to defend it if you should be challenged. So that's what I have so far.
That's great, John. Thank you. Any questions for John or thoughts? All righty. It's been a long evening. Thank you for hanging in with us. Yes, Steve.
Hey, the 2040 comprehensive plan, I believe some comments were going to be turned in, right, or expected to be turned in. Is there a particular last day that you want those, Doug?
No, I mean, we're not going to look at it again until when?
August, maybe.
August. So yeah, I mean, sometime in the next couple of weeks, I would think.
Okay.
Steve?
Had to unmute there, sorry. On that topic as well, we got our wires crossed a little bit today. Our social media page says that the city council was going to be addressing the comprehensive plan tonight, which that was not part of our agenda. And then the city website says, beginning at the June work session, which is tonight, to consider voting to accept at the June regular meeting. So we're kind of mixed messaging, kind of what the timeline is for this. I think the last time I heard from the mayor on it, we were not in a rush to do this. So I think we need to get our messaging aligned. We need to communicate clearly where we're at. So
yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think what happened was before Cassie went off to have the baby, that probably was put out there.
No, it was just put out today. It was posted today that we were going to be addressing it tonight.
I don't know who would have posted it because Sally's away sick.
Yeah, social media page today.
Now you want to check with Cassie?
I don't know how that happened.
Okay, we'll have to check it out. I don't know how it got there. But thanks for pointing it out. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? All right. Well, Larry, we didn't seem to have much connectivity with you, so I think you're still there, and hopefully you can hear us. I bid everyone a good night, and we'll see you a week from today.
Good job. Thank you.
Great,
Bye,
thank you.
bye.